Thank you. Good evening, everyone. You can hear me okay? Right on. So thanks for hosting me. I really appreciate it. It's been a number of years since I've done a presentation here in London like this. And decided I was going to go with a topic that's been rather topical, one that I keep encountering more and more in the training and the coaching that I'm doing, which really deals with we're beyond having taken in a single project. We're beyond a pilot stage in using Agile, and other parts of the organization start to get involved. So things like budgeting and cost accounting and things like that. So that's really the topic for tonight. Let me just give you a quick introduction to myself so you have a better idea of who I am. So my background is software development. My degrees are all in computer science, and typical path through software companies: developer, project manager, VP of engineering. I've run a number of smaller software companies. I'm an old object technology guy. If anybody here is old enough to remember it, I come out of the Smalltalk world. So in the late 1980s, I helped bring Smalltalk out of the research labs at Xerox PARC in the Silicon Valley. So we started a company called Park Place Systems, and we were the first to sort of commercialize object technology. So I've been doing Agile since the early 1990s. Scrum formally since 2000. At that point, I was working for a startup company called Genomica. We built software for statistical genetics. I ended up inheriting a 100-person team that wasn't functioning well. We moved it over to Scrum. It worked out better for us. And I've been using Scrum ever since. Some of you might know I was the first managing director of the Scrum Alliance. So for a one-year tour of duty, I ran the worldwide Scrum organization back in 2007. And today I do a lot of this. I do a lot of training and coaching. And so what I'm going to present here is the results of what I keep running into. Right, every week I'm typically with one or two companies somewhere around the world. I'm in London this week. I was in Boston and New York last week. A week before that, Dayton, and a week before that, Tokyo. So I get to see a lot of what different companies are doing, what's working, what isn't working. So I'm going to jump right into it. Oh, yeah, I did write a book on Scrum, or on Agile. So if you're interested, I brought a copy. You can look at it. Don't be impressed. I wrote it in English. They just translated it into other languages. This guy's like, he writes in Chinese and Japanese. No. I broke it into 3 topics for tonight. I want to talk about sort of traditional budgeting and planning to position what we're going to discuss. And then I want to start talking about sort of agile budgeting and planning. And I want to end with a discussion on agile cost accounting. And by the way, I'm not a hold a question until the end kind of guy. If it's on your mind and you see the discussion happening, you want to ask a question, by all means ask, right? And I'm going to repeat all the questions because they are recording, so that way we'll capture it there, so if anybody wants to watch it afterwards. But let's start with sort of traditional budgeting and planning. I wonder how many of you experience this, right? That we need a detailed budget for each center, and you're going to be measured against your budget. So I need to know exactly what your budget is, and I'm going to hold you to how you spend every pound of that money. This has some issues. First, think about the detailed upfront projections that you would have to do in order to be able to do this. I'll suggest to you that this will actually promote a greed environment for finite resources, right? We all know that there's only so much money in the bucket, and we're all trying to get our piece out of it when we do our budgeting and planning. So it puts us in a competition of sorts to make that happen. I'm sure this happens in the UK. I know it happens in the US. You have this use it or lose it mentality. I actually like this. I'm the beneficiary of this because in November of each year, the other trainers in the room can weigh in. In November of each year, I get a ton of calls like, we have to get training in before the end of the year. I'm like, why? Because my budget, I have to use my budget before December 31st. Otherwise, I won't get the same budget next year. So it promotes this, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it and you won't have it next year mentality, which I think seems quite inappropriate, even though I am a beneficiary of that. I argue that it's going to lead to utilization-based planning, that we're trying to put plans together where the focus is how do we make sure that we have fully utilized all the people in our organization, because clearly any underutilization of people would be deemed waste. And who wants to have waste in their organization? This leads to very rigid types of budgets. Right? In a lot of organizations, once a budget is set, changing it can be a rather difficult endeavor. Other organizations, maybe it's easier, but in many it's not. And this gets very complicated in an environment where projects can span cost centers. Because oftentimes budgeting happens at a cost center level, but what happens when the project you're doing requires this cost center to be involved and this cost center and the third one. And now I have to worry about how did I budget across all three cost centers to ensure I had sufficient resources to make this one project successful. By the way, I will post these slides online so you can download them. They'll be on my website tonight on involution.com, involution.com right here. So, and you'll just go to the resource tab and there'll be a presentations link. You'll find it and you can just download it. But feel free to take pictures, of course, if you want. And I'm going to suggest that this whole approach biases teams towards the least risky solution, right? If money's hard to come by and it's in budgets and you want to be accurate about what you're doing, you're not looking for the most innovative, creative thing you could possibly do that has the most risk. You're looking for the surefire, hey, this is going to work, I know it's going to work type of solution. Hard to imagine business success when we're always shooting for a very low bar. So that's sort of typical stuff. Now, if you step back and you kind of look at it, when you do annual planning, I mean, it assumes that you have a lot of stability in a world where you really don't. If I ask you to plan annually, so please give me your annual plan, probably up to 15 months out, right? Because typically in the third quarter of the fiscal year, I want you to plan. Now do it up to 15 months out. Wow, that's a rather risky thing, and can I argue a non-agile-like way of doing it? On the day you have the worst possible knowledge about the upcoming year, please predict exactly what you're going to do up to 15 months out. Oh, and I'm going to hold you to it as well once you've made that prediction. That seems a bit risky for us. There's this belief, though, but if we plan in large batches, we get the sort of manufacturing equivalent of economies of scale, which is not true. Or you'd say, well, big batches are better. Well, big batches are risky because when you plan in large batches, if something were to go wrong, you have a large batch that might need to be reworked or thrown out. So you want to find sort of the economically sensible batch size. This is a diagram borrowed from Donald Reinerson's book, Dealing with Flow, where it shows that somewhere in the middle is probably a decent-sized batch. You don't want to plan in too small of an increment because the overhead's too high, too large, and the waste characteristics start to grow. So there's a proper amount of batch size. We'll have to see if we can find that. Then companies end up with something like this. I wonder if your company has this. The glorious Excel spreadsheet. Let's lay out all the different projects for the entire year with their budgets, their resource allocations in one spreadsheet. And then some poor individual has to own that and keep it updated. I hope that's not you. I certainly don't want it to be me. All right, so let's take a look at what's going on here. First of all, we have to do all this work at the point in time when we have poor information. Do you agree with the following statement? On the first day, either of a new project or of the new year, when you're being asked to do the planning, that is the day you will have the worst possible knowledge you will have over that period of time. Isn't it fair to assume that every subsequent day that you work on something, you're a little bit smarter about what you're doing and not a little bit dumber? You really have to go like this. Yeah, of course you are. Cumulative knowledge goes up. But at the earliest point in time, when I have the worst possible knowledge I'm ever going to have, please give me the detailed budgets and plans. Oh, and you can't change them because I'm going to hold you to it once you give them to me. That seems like a rather dangerous thing to have done. And it's certainly not a very agile-like thing to have done. Be very predictive on the day you have the worst possible knowledge. I think we could do better. Then you end up doing something like this for each of the projects. Oh, come on, admit it. There's your 18-month Gantt chart up on the wall. When's the last time you did that? When's the last time you put that up on the wall and 18 months later stood back, looked at it, and went, yep, got it, perfect? Has that happened to anybody here before? I've never been that good or that lucky to make that work. But you kind of have to do that for each of these projects that you're planning to do next year. Otherwise, how would you have enough detailed information to answer questions like this? When will you be done? Right, if you didn't lay out the task level work, connect up the dependencies, assign people to the task, find the critical path, do resource leveling across the critical path, how could you answer the question, when will you be done? Oh, it's worse than that. I put your name on a task that's going to start 18 months from today. What do you think the probability is you'll do that task 18 months from today? Is this a ridiculous level of planning to do at the day you have the worst possible knowledge? Give me the most detailed plan you could ever imagine up to 18 months out with names on it. Good luck. I'm not sure how that's going to work. Oh, and then, of course, we have everybody laid out here, and we're trying to make sure we keep them 100% utilized, right? Remember those graphs that always say, oh, George is only 90% utilized, so there's clearly more work that George can do, right? And Fred, well, he's at 125% utilization, whatever that means, right? Maybe we should balance that a little bit. Here's the problem with focusing on utilization. Well, watch the baton, not the runners. Let me explain what I mean. In any organization, I think you're interested in eliminating waste. I hope we would agree with that. I don't care if you do Agile or don't do Agile, you're still interested in eliminating waste. The issue is that there are often multiple forms of waste and they trade off. As one form of waste goes down, frequently another form of waste will go the other way. And you have to be able to measure those wastes in the same units of measure, or you don't know that you got rid of the right form of waste. So I have a question for you. In software product development, what is the largest cost? Largest cost in software product development? People, of course, right? Once I equip you with your hardware and your software, all the rest of the cost is people. Hence, once I know my budget, I know my head count. Right? That's how that would typically work. So the most visible form of waste in software product development would be underutilization of your people. It's the most expensive resources, and if you're not utilizing them fully, that feels like waste. So what do most organizations try to do? They try to eliminate that form of waste, drive it to zero. So if I hired you in to do testing, and I assign you to a project, and that project only needs you 60% of your time, if I stop there, it gives the illusion that you have a 40% underutilization of the tester. And by the way, middle management and senior management probably measures me on how utilized I keep you. And that won't work. So what do? I assign you to a second project. Why? And I got you up to 90% utilization. That feels better. But there's still 10% waste, perceived waste. So what do? Well, say hi to 3 projects. Clever me. I've eliminated idle tester waste. I drove underutilization waste of my tester to zero. Question is, what went the other way? Let's see. Let's apply that same strategy to the 4x100 meter relay race at the Olympics. The strategy of let's keep them 100% busy. If I apply that strategy to that race, first observation of that race, that is a very inefficient race. No, it is. I pay those ladies 100% salary to run. Each one runs 25% of the time. No, I have a 75% underutilization of my runners. That won't do. Now, of course, they're going to look at me and say, well, what do you want me to do when I'm not carrying the baton? I don't know, like run up and down the stands or something. No, I pay them to run, right? They should run. Actually, I have a much better suggestion. You'll like this one better. There's another racetrack over there. No, you should run another race over there while you're waiting for the baton over here. Clever me. I have eliminated idle runner waste, completely missing the whole point. In that race, you don't win the gold medal because you kept the runners busy. You won the gold medal because you got the baton across the finish line first, leading to the critical observation. We are watching the wrong thing. In that race, you don't watch the runners. You watch the baton. Now, if the baton ends up on the ground, you don't win the gold medal. Let me translate that back to how it affects us. The baton, that's the work. The work that has to flow across the collection of teams that we put in place to get the job done. If the baton ends up on the ground, that's the equivalent of the work getting blocked. Usually sounds like this. My team's blocked, can't move forward, waiting on your team to do something. Until your team does this, my team's blocked. What's that mean? We get to take our work, go over to their queue, and put it in their queue. This is all this inventory that's building up all over product development. The work that's blocked, it's not moving. The end result of that is severe economic damage. What causes the damage in organizations isn't idle workers. It's the idle work. The problem is during budgeting and planning, we're optimizing the wrong variable. We're trying to optimize to keep everybody 100% utilized, missing the point that by doing that, we have all this blocked work building up in queues all over product development. And that's causing severe damage. Look at the graph. I borrowed it from queuing theory. You don't need to know anything about queuing theory to know it's right. You just have to own a computer. What happens when you run your machine at 100% CPU, 100% memory utilization? What happens on your computer? Yeah, nothing happens on your computer. Technically, it's thrashing. You're trying to get more and more work done, and nothing's actually happening. If you find yourself in the high Q state, the worst thing you can do is wait. Literally, it might take an eternity for anything to finish, which means if you find yourself in that state, you're going to open up like Task Manager, start killing jobs, or if it's really bad, what are you going to do? You're going to reboot. It's easy to get into the high Q state. It's hard to get out. Right? This is why people who manage server farms for a living know that they never run their servers above 80% utilization. Look at the graph. I'll do the math for you. Math is easy. Go from 80 to 90% in the graph, double the queue size. Go from 90 to 95, double it again. Go from 95 to 100, double it again. You don't want to be anywhere near the exponential part of that curve. But what happens is we drive underutilization waste out of the system. What goes the other way? Queue size. And queue size equals cost of delay. And we pay a huge price for this. If it's not clear, I'll make it. Let's say you went to the coffee shop on your way over. You stopped in, they were 80% utilized. There's 3 people in queue in front of you. We can all do the math. 3 people in front of me, it's taking about 2 minutes per person. Okay, I'll wait. You go in and there's 100% utilization. There's 19 people in queue in front of you. You do that math again, you turn around and walk out. Queue size equals cost of delay. So all that work building up all over product development is causing these huge delay costs. We're planning in a way that's guaranteeing we're going to have enormous economic waste because we're watching the wrong thing. Utilization-based planning is a disaster. Now the problem is we start generating all this planning inventory and we have to manage it. Right, I got all these spreadsheets that have to be updated. I got all these plans for each of those projects. They're wrong. I know they're wrong. I mean, I was sure about that stuff when I did it. That was a guess. And I'm going to have to update all this inventory. I'm going to have an army of people whose only job in life is to keep the inventory updated, the planning inventory, for no particularly good reason. I don't get any value out of having done that. Right? Now you have this as well. It assumes that they're right. The default assumption was the plan that I put up on the wall the first day was right, and that if the teams start to deviate from the plan during the project, isn't the knee-jerk reaction, bad teams, better get a project manager in here to get you guys back on plan. The more likely assumption is bad plan. Right? I'm reminded of, every time I think about this, in Agile we constantly replan. We don't assume the plans are right at all. The joke here is that I was informed that your Special Forces, the SAS, have one of their guides is a quote. The quote is, when hiking in the woods and the map and the terrain don't match, in all instances, believe the terrain. Oh, come on, you have to face it. You Brits are sensible people. All right? Map says there's not supposed to be a lake here. I guess there's no lake here. Let's keep going. Should we really follow a plan that we put together on the first day, one that's likely extremely wrong? Or maybe in an Agile world, we buy into the fact of light planning up front with a healthy dose of replanning when the map and the terrain don't match. When the map, the plan up on the wall, and the terrain don't match, it's time to replan. You just don't blindly follow the plan, right? So the belief is that it's a result of poor execution, right? The reason we're doing this. It's ignoring the fact that we're constantly generating information that we should be inspecting and adapting when it shows up. What if we find out our initial assumptions are just wrong? Would you stop? We'll come back to that. I'd like to suggest this. Following that original plan, no matter how well conceived it was or how skillful your execution, that could easily be a recipe for disaster. But it was a great plan. I'm telling you, it's a fantastic plan. And we're executing really well, except we're really not because the plan's changing. I don't think we want to go down this path. And then you have this. Maybe you have to do this in your company, variance analysis. That's our original target. That's where we expect to be. And we set up this threshold. If we ever cross that threshold, we have to do a variance analysis. I typically only work with large companies, really big companies. The one company I'm working with has a $150 million budget for IT right now. So they do a lot of big things. Well, in companies like that, the moment you cross this threshold, the finance guys get involved to figure out what's going wrong with your project because you've crossed a variance threshold, right? And we're moving, that's our true target, but that's the original target, right? In Agile, we assume we sort of inspect and adapt our way to the right place, not that we could guess the right place on the first day. So the problem here with this whole variance analysis, first, it's reactive in its nature. It only takes place when you cross the variance trigger. Before that, apparently, it doesn't matter. Even though we could be wrong already, but we're not going to do anything until we react to crossing some kind of threshold. Then I have to go into a meeting where I have to justify why I crossed the line here, when my only response could be, because that's the right thing to have done. In the situation we're in, that's the correct action to have taken. But now I'm in meetings pulling me away from doing useful work to justify why I've crossed some of this trigger, right? How can that be a value-adding activity when it's pulling you away from doing value-adding work? Clearly not a winning scenario. I'm arguing this slows down our ability to move quickly because you're going to think twice about taking action because your first thought will be, am I going to cross that threshold and have to go meet with finance to justify why? Again, I can hardly imagine this being an Agile-like way of doing it. Then you have that whole cost center problem we talked about before. I have all these teams all cluster together into a cost center. They cluster together, so do they. They might interact as well, but they cluster in the cost centers. Now I have a project that requires work in each of these cost centers. Most organizations do cost center focused budgeting. That means this cost center has to understand their piece of that project and budget appropriately just for their piece, which means somebody up front had to carve that into exactly the pieces that each cost center had to deal with and do that correctly. Good luck with that. And if they're wrong, a budget's wrong and it starts cascading across because I realize they need more money to do the job because less of the work is here and more of the work is up there. This is all traditional budgeting. I'm trying to illustrate why in an Agile world, this complicates things to the point where if you try to do this, you likely will not be successful. And the problem is, unless you're in senior management of the finance team, you didn't even see this until they asked you to do work that you didn't want to do anyway. Give me the full plan for the upcoming project. Give me all the requirements on the first day. Let's do it differently then. Let's talk about how we would do this from an Agile perspective. So, Agile budgeting and planning. I want to break it into a couple key areas. In this case, dealing with uncertainty. There was a lot of uncertainty in the discussion that we just had. How might we deal with it? Well, first, let's agree we're not going to get the budgets right up front or the plans. Can you do that in your company? If you made that statement, what would people say to you? Okay, fine, I'll fire you and hire somebody who can. Is that the reaction to that? I mean, in Agile, we don't assume we can get it right on the first day. That's not a very sensible approach for us to have taken. Upfront budgeting and planning should be helpful, though. I'm not saying we don't do any upfront budgeting and planning. I'm simply saying in Agile, we do a helpful amount of upfront budgeting and planning, not an excessive amount. Trying to do it all up to 15 months ahead of time and get full project plans for all the projects that we're anticipating doing is just not a very Agile-like way of doing it. But I don't think I'm going to walk into the CEO's office and say, we're not going to do any budgeting and planning next year. That's not going to work. We do some, obviously. In the spirit of the last responsible moment, I would like to keep my budgeting and planning options open until the last responsible moment. If you're not familiar with that Agile principle, it says this. On the first day when you have the worst possible knowledge, is that the day you really want to make all the critical, irreversible decisions? Likely not. Wouldn't a better strategy be wait until you have better information and then make the decision? Because then you're less likely to make a mistake. Doesn't mean you'll avoid the mistake, just you're less likely to make it. So I want to keep my options open. Why do I want to commit too early to things I don't really know about? Look, we'll plan sort of roughly for the long term, but why can't we plan a little bit more accurately for the short term? We should have better visibility into what's going to happen next versus what's going to happen 12 months from now. So plan that way. And we prefer experimentation. This could be a big change in a lot of organizations. Knowledge acquisition over a desire for precision. People are looking for precision in your budgets or plans when you can't give it. I'd rather say to them, I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you exactly what experiment or what thing I'm going to do in order to acquire the knowledge. I don't know about your experience. My experience is if I'm dealing with reasonable people, they get that. They get the fact that I know very little today, but if I do some work, I can actually get better knowledge and give you more precision in an answer. And as we said, I want to focus more on adapting in sort of rebudgeting and replanning than conforming to bad budgets and plans, right? When the map and the terrain don't match kind of stuff. So these are sort of the core principles that I want to follow for dealing with uncertainty when I do agile planning and budgeting. Questions on any of that? Please. Sure. So the comment is, what does it mean to plan roughly for the long term? It means that I'd give some consideration to the long term, but I'm going to show you a picture shortly of where the idea is maybe in Q1 of this upcoming fiscal year, I understand where 100% of my money is going to be spent. But in Q4, I only understand where 40% is going to be spent. I have some ideas of what I want to do in Q4, but why would I try to allocate 100% of the funds for something that's 3 quarters out, almost 4 quarters out into the future? So I do a rough plan. I have some ideas of what I'm going to do, but I haven't locked everything down. I give myself a budget that allows me to maneuver when things start changing, because that's the only guarantee here. Things will start changing. So I will illustrate that with the pictures. It's a good question to ask. Follow-ons to that or other questions? Please. Yes. Economically. You're always trading off two costs when it comes to the last responsible moment. There's always the cost of making the decision traded off against the cost of not making the decision. The last responsible moment occurs when those two curves cross, because beyond that point in time, if you waited longer, it would cost you more to defer than it would to decide. So I base all my decisions on the economics of the choice. Last responsible moment can be defined economically as, yeah, if you waited longer, then you're just spending more money to defer. You should just decide at that point. The problem with deciding too early is if you're wrong, you could be wrong in a very large way. And if you're making a critical decision, and quite honestly, annual budgeting in most companies falls under the category of a critical decision. Because as I said, in a lot of companies, once that decision's made, it gets locked down. And now you're held accountable. And so next year, I'm going to watch how you spend every single pound. And when you start to deviate for that, I'm going to do all this variance analysis to figure out why you were so wrong. Now get back on your plan. Yeah, but the plan was wrong. I need a different plan. No. That was the baseline plan for the year, and you're deviating from it. I would like to not commit to that until the last responsible moment. More on this to come, by the way. I'm going to illustrate some of these points. So what I'm doing here is I'm laying out the core principles for agile planning and budgeting, and then I'm going to use examples for specific ones. I can't do them all. It would take way too long, but I'll do some of them. Other questions before I go to the next slide, please? So how does knowledge acquisition sort of relate to the whole precision piece? So when you're in the presence of rather poor information, it's hard to be precise. When will you be done? I will be done May 31st, 2017 at 3:52 in the afternoon. Wow, that is an amazingly precise answer when you are like 15 months out. Maybe I should have said, we will be done in the second quarter of 2017. Okay, now that's a range, but the range gives me the ability to express my degree of uncertainty, right? Because if I had said, that's one level, right? Q2 2017 is 1 degree of uncertainty. What if I'd said this? We'll be done during 2017. I've expressed an entirely different level of uncertainty on that one, right? Because I'm now telling you it could be any time during the whole year. I can't give you a lot of precision in the presence of bad information. You will not predict away uncertainty. In the presence of uncertainty in Agile, what do? We buy information. That goes by a lot of different terms, right? I'm sure you use some of these. Prototype, proof of concept, study, experiment, spike. Choose your favorite term. They all mean the same thing to me. It's the act of buying information. And why did we do that? Because we felt that the value of the information we got, it far exceeded the cost of getting it. So the economics made sense, so we buy the information. Once you buy information, you can reduce uncertainty. By reducing uncertainty, I can improve precision. But on the first day, the day I have the worst possible knowledge I'm ever going to have, asking me precise questions like, exactly when will you be done? It's like, wow, that assumes a level of information I don't have yet, and the only way I'm going to get it is to learn. And asking me to go off and think longer and harder about the problem isn't going to make the answer any better. It's just going to waste more time, which is why I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the upfront budgeting and planning. I want to spend a helpful amount of time and then do the rest just in time at the last responsible moment. All right, let's take a little bit further. So now I want to focus on batch size. I brought that up a little bit earlier, this whole concept of batch size. Let's plan and budget in smaller batches. Now, the horizon-adjusted precision is what I was referring to. Look, my precision early on should be better than my precision 4 quarters out. I have better visibility into what we're about to do immediately, like tomorrow, next week, next month. Ask me 12 months out, I'm less likely to give you precision. So I want to sort of horizon adjust my precision here. I'm going to generate all kinds of planning inventory. I need to manage it. The problem before on the watch the baton, not the runners, is that we were building up all this inventory all over product development. That was the blocked work, and that causes severe economic damage. Same thing here. I'm now building up planning inventory, all those spreadsheets, all those project plans that are out there. So I'm going to have some of that, don't get me wrong, but I want to manage it correctly rather than having an army of people that have to continually maintain it at some unreasonable cost. And I'm going to budget more frequently. Why do it once a year? That doesn't feel very agile-like. Why wouldn't you do it in smaller batches and do it more frequently throughout the year? Yes, there'll be some overarching planning that we do because you have to. Right? I don't know about your company, but I've never worked at a company where I had the luxury of asking for a budget. I was always told what my budget was. Here's your budget for the year. And that was easy. Once I knew my budget, I knew my head count. And the only question I had to answer at that point was, given that budget with that head count, what work can I get done out of the portfolio backlog? That's usually the question I had to answer. I'm having a hard time remembering the last time I had the chance to ask for it. Please. So the comment is, I'm repeating for the folks online. Yeah, I mean, is that how it usually goes? That you do all this work, weeks, maybe even months, to come up with all this data, and then they're like, yeah, nice start you threw in the pub, but that's not the target I actually drew, so we'll just go with mine. I think that happens a lot. Not always, right? I mean, I am sure in certain companies you might have the luxury of actually saying, this is how much money we want. When I worked at IBM, I'll tell you how it worked. It was simple. IBM projected revenues for the next fiscal year. Wall Street told IBM what percentage of revenues they were allowed to spend on R&D. Otherwise, they would punish them, right? And so that gave them a number. That number ended in a B. That was R&D budget. My pitiful little group of 130 people at IBM got some small number that ended in an M. Once I knew that number, I knew my head count. I was good to go. That's how budgeting happened there. I never had the luxury of going back and say, boy, I'd actually like 3x that number. You'd be like, yeah, that's your number. Now make it work. And then the negotiation becomes on what can I get done for that number and whether people will be happy or not with what we can accomplish. Could go a different way. That's how it's always worked for me. Oh, and I want to optimize my budgeting and plannings above the level of the teams and projects. Boy, if I'm down at this level, that is almost like micro budgeting and micro planning. I'd like to try and avoid that. So I want to do it at a higher level, maybe a higher level product level or value stream level would be a much more appropriate level for doing this, because then it gives me the ability to maneuver within a product or value stream to reallocate without having to constantly go up and ask permission to do things, which just slows the whole process down. I'm going to illustrate some more of this, but before I push on, any comments or questions on that? Please. Hmm. Yeah. So that's the heart of our discussion here is I argue that is exactly what I see in most companies that I visit, that there's a massive disconnect between how we want to do agile downstream and how this upfront process is taking place, and we're being forced into a position to do work that no sensible agilist would ever want to do, right? But how do you reconcile the fact that you're being told by management, I need to know the number and tell me what I'm going to get, and if you can't tell me now, I'll give it to him. I'll just reallocate it to somebody else. What I'm trying to do, I'm hoping we have some senior managers in the room. Right? I'm trying to get people to understand that this is how we should be doing it, and so they move off of that. If you're looking for me to give you a solution to accommodate that foolishness, I have no solution to offer you. I'm arguing it's the wrong way to do it. That if an organization wants to be successful in the long term, we have to embrace these agile principles through the value chain. Please. Hmm. Absolutely. I don't fault them for that. Okay, so all right, let's handle that. So the question was this. You're a publicly traded company, and you have certain expectations that you're going to hit a certain profit for the year, which means you have to generate a certain amount of revenue and you have a certain amount of expenses that will offset that. So I have no problem at strategic planning if senior management wants to say our revenue target for next year is £1 billion, and we expect to have about 800 million in expenses, so we should see 200 million in profit. I'm good with that. That's their job. They should do things like that. The question is, how do we meet that? And what I'm trying to do is say, here's my argument back to senior management. I'd like to help you meet that goal. And what you're asking us to do is just wasting time, that valuable time we could have been spending trying to achieve that goal, because we're producing all of these artifacts that are wrong, that are going to need to constantly be updated. It only gives you the illusion that we understand what we're talking about. And it's only an illusion because we put it together on the first day, the day we had the worst possible knowledge we were ever going to have. So let me work with you to see how we're going to meet that number. And by the way, don't you want to have the ability to maneuver, to pivot, to be agile, nimble, and adjust when business conditions during the next year start to change and competitors take totally unpredictable actions? Nothing that we can predict today, and they do that. Wouldn't it be a better strategy if we moved quickly to a new direction to achieve your 200 million pound profit? That's what I'm trying to do with them. Please. Absolutely. I'm taking exactly what we do. Thank you. Right. I'm taking exactly what we do with agile development and saying, why can't we apply the same core principles that guide how we build products and use that at the planning and budgeting level to say, why aren't we an agile organization? Why can't we do it here? If you actually believe in the principles, you either do or you don't, right? I do. I live by these principles. I've run a homeschool in our house on agile principles, right? I do stand-ups with my wife. Don't laugh about that, right? But it works, right? You either believe the stuff or you don't. If you believe it, then why wouldn't the same core principles, things like limiting WIP? Oh, you think that's just a development idea? Oh, limiting WIP and work in progress, that's just for development. The business doesn't have to worry about that. How many people here are working on too many projects at the same time? Oh, come on, don't lie. Put your hands up, right? You understand the point. You didn't cause that problem. Somebody above you decided that they were going to inject all that work into the system up front on the first day. So they overloaded the system already. How can you do agile downstream when you're already compromised on the first day? When our WIP limit for doing work in our organization is 10 projects and they've injected 40 into the system at the same time. The same principles we use apply at their level. They just have to apply them. They're not applying agile principles at budgeting and planning, and the problem is they're dragging us into it, and we're having to adjust what we do downstream to make it work upstream for them, and I'm arguing it should be the reverse. Please. Okay. So the question was, you're an agency, so you're a contractor. You got outsourced work, right? Are they trying to do it with you on a fixed price basis? Sure, but so the question is, the fixed price part is critical to me because most contracts that you encounter today are, the company that wants the work insists that you do a fixed price contract. Now, all right, let's walk through that foolishness for a moment. What's the first thing they're going to have to do before you give them a fixed price? Give you the full, unchanging scope on the first day, the day they have the worst possible knowledge they'll ever have. Will you agree with me there's no such thing as a fixed price contract? I've never met one that was. I promise you, go to accounting, ask them to run a report of the total amount paid on the contract, look at the original number on the contract, look at the total amount paid, and it'll never be the same unless you terminated the contract. And they won't be. Why? Because you had to invoke the 22 pages in Appendix A on change control every time they changed their mind, because there's no way they could have gotten it right up front, not on the first day. So that's how the agency is going to make all its money, is on the change requests. This is a lose-lose game. You should write an agile subcontract with them. I've done it. I was product owner on a website called Comparative Agility for many years. I outsourced development to a third-party company, wrote an agile subcontract with him. There's no way I could have given him a requirements doc on the first day. Hey, I want people to be able to come to a website, take a survey, and at the end it'll tell them how agile they are. Can I have more details? I don't know what they are yet. They'll emerge though. And when they do, I'll let you know. All right, so they charge me time and materials every sprint for the work I did. The only variable in the whole equation is how many sprints. And I could terminate the contract anytime I want. It worked beautifully for 4 years. Please. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, how do I keep who accountable for the deliverables? Okay, so how do we keep the contractors accountable for deliverables? So the first question is, how specific were you on the deliverables on the first day when you had the worst possible knowledge you will ever have? I'm just curious, right? Because my guess is you've changed your definition of what is a deliverable. I knew it. I wanted a website that allows me people to take surveys. That's my deliverable. There's a lot of details I haven't specified yet, and I couldn't. They'll come out over time. So accountability is done sprint to sprint, just like you would have done it internally. How is this any different than how you would have done Scrum internally? The only difference is I outsourced and I leased a Scrum master and a development team from another company. That's the only difference between how I did Scrum and an internal company would have done it. I just leased a team from another company. But I look at the progress every single sprint, just like I would if I was a product owner on an internal team. It's my money. And every sprint I want to know, did I get good value for what I just spent? It's all about the economics. And the moment I'm starting to think I don't get good value, I have a conversation. Hey, I'm not sure I'm getting my 20,000 pounds worth of value this sprint. And if it's a continuum problem, either I change my expectations on value or I terminate the contract and I move on, which of course you would have the right to do. So hold them accountable to what? To a vision that's going to be fluctuating over time? You couldn't have locked it down 100% up front. So I hold them accountable every sprint, which is the only reasonable thing I can do. This is what you said you were going to do this sprint. Let's see what you got done. Just like you would in an internal team. These are great questions. It's right to the heart of what we're doing. Let's take it to the next piece. Now I want to talk about sort of this decentralized decision making. Remember, this kind of planning and budgeting tends to be very centralized. Think about the issues. I want to apply this concept that some people call mission command. It's kind of how the military works. Look, mission command is you give the basic idea, folks, this is the mission we're trying to achieve. And each layer down in the hierarchy figures out how to do their piece to align with the mission without the top part of the hierarchy telling everybody all the way down to the bottom how to achieve the goal. Mission command, which allows for, as it says, fast, additive, decentralized decision making. I want to push my planning and budgeting down that way also. This is our overall goal. I want to make 200 million pounds of revenue this year. Now let's figure out how you're going to work in your teams to help me align and achieve that goal, rather than me trying to pre-specify that all the way down to the most detailed team level. It's a ridiculous thing to try and do. But you better have trust. If you don't trust the people below you to make decisions that align with mission command, then you won't do it. No. If I don't do it at my level, I don't trust that it's ever going to happen in the correct way. Then, okay, you don't have the right organization for doing it because you're going to be back to top-down command and control, which in an agile world isn't what we do. We push control down to the lowest level we can possibly push it. And we let people at that level make decisions within their realm of authority. They're not making decisions that bet the company, right? But they're making decisions at their level. You push it down. If you don't have a culture of transparency in place, you're not going to know. You're not going to be able to do this. And the big problem that I see, I wonder if it happens in your company. I had this happen last week at a company I was visiting. Someone would say, this isn't going to work. What we're doing isn't going to work. I'm like, so do your senior management know that? Oh, no. Why not? No, they don't want to hear bad news. So what, do you only communicate good news up? Bad news doesn't flow up? No, bad news stays here. You're going to tell them that. Okay, I don't know how you're going to be agile in an environment where you don't have transparent access to the information. Remember, agile is an empirical process. There's 3 legs on the agile stool: inspect, adapt, transparency. If you don't have transparency, the other 2 are rather hard to do. Right? You got to have that. And I want to be able to very quickly and very flexibly reallocate resources to swarm on emergent value. What happens when the brilliant idea nobody thought about at strategic planning presents itself? And we're like, that's the billion-pound opportunity right there. Wouldn't you want to very quickly be able to swarm on it? No, look, we can't swarm. Here's the issue. Look at all those plans up there that we're going to have to redo it. No, that'll break the budget for this year. We're not allocated to do it that way. We're talking about variance analysis. We're going to be called out on everything. Let that one go. Okay, let the billion-pound opportunity go then. Or you move quickly onto it. You'd be agile if you did this. I'm more interested in your ability to get rid of bottlenecks than you are to do variance analysis. Don't justify why you varied from some plan you put together on the first day. Remove the bottlenecks so that you're constantly making progress forward, and explain why you're doing that without justifying, hey, you're 10,000 pounds over budget today. How did that happen? Come into my office. I want a complete debrief on why you're 10,000 pounds over budget. It's like, seriously? That's the conversation you want to have with me? There isn't a more valuable conversation you want to have? By the way, is 10,000 pounds bust the budget around here? When you have a 150 million pound budget? Why are we doing this? Look, we plan at multiple levels. This is the planning onion. You can peel back the layers of planning here. All the way from strategy level, which I'm arguing you have to do, not because it defines all of the projects for the upcoming year, but because it defines strategic initiatives that we're going to need. I'll illustrate why in a moment. Portfolio level planning, product level planning, release level planning, sprint level planning, daily level planning. We do a lot of planning here. The stuff we're talking about here is really at sort of strategy portfolio, and it touches product a little bit to the extent that people are asking us for the full project plan for their product. Right? I'm not really talking about sprint level or daily level here. That's a different level of detail that teams deal with. Think about budgeting for a moment. You could sort of break it into 3 major pieces. There's the target. That's what we want to have happen. That's going to come out of strategic planning. This is what we want. That's when we're going to define our strategic themes, our initiatives, and you're going to align a percentage of your budget. I want to spend 40% of next year's budget on keeping the systems alive and running. I want to spend 30% building this cool new system we've been talking about, and another 30% on the next releases of these other major systems. Okay, that I expect to come from senior management. Perfectly reasonable. Strategic vision, every company should do it. Now the forecast starts to get into a little bit of an interesting territory. That's what we think will happen. That's what we want to have happen. Let's not confuse what we want with what we think we can do, because they're not the same thing. And then you have sort of resource allocation. Right now I have the resources, the people, or equipment, as the case may be, and they have to be allocated to make it happen, right? So that's what I want to have happen, and now I have to sort of allocate the people in a way that I think would actually make it happen, right? Let me illustrate this. So during strategic planning, I expect something like this to result. A pie chart, if you will. Okay, we have £1 billion we're going to spend next year, and I'm going to carve up the pie this way. Initiative 1's getting this much, initiative 2. So you got these major themes or initiatives. Again, senior management owns this, and they should definitely do it. And the idea of those initiatives, they inform what I call the strategic filter. Strategic filter. Hey, when someone proposes a great new idea, first thing I want to do is run it through the filter and ask the obvious question. Does that align with one of the initiatives? Because if it doesn't, it's a no-go. I can drop it out immediately. Nope, sorry, this year, I don't see how that idea aligns with any of the core initiatives that we've set out. Now, if you want to rethink the initiatives because maybe an emergent idea has presented itself, then by all means. But right now, it would be a no-go. If it clears this, we're at least willing to consider it. All right, now take it one more step further. I was saying allocate funding above the level of an individual team. I'm assuming you're doing this at scale. If you're in a company where you have one team and one product backlog, I worship you, right? Life is easy, life is good, right? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about big stuff, right? A lot of money, a lot of teams, a lot of chaos. So you want to allocate money at the value stream or product level. This equates to a value stream, a collection of teams that work collaboratively together to get the baton across the finish line and not drop it on the ground. So we're probably allocating funds at this level, and the goal was to allow the teams inside that value stream under the principle of mission command to make decisions that align with the goal of that value stream without having to keep running up the food chain to get permission to re-budget or reallocate around. I've already assigned the money to the value stream or the product. Let them maneuver inside. Make it much more agile-like. So I want to do it at this level. All right, now, this is the question earlier about how do you do sort of horizon-adjusted precision. What I was suggesting was this. In certain companies, maybe they do it this way. This is an example, actually, I picked up at Agile 2015. A friend of mine was presenting about the Finnish broadcasting system, Yle, I think it is, and they were presenting how they do budgeting. And the way they do it is at the beginning of the year, they try to figure out how they're going to spend the money in Q1, the first 3 months. And they're willing to allocate 100% of the budget at that point to the initiatives, the things they know they're going to work on in Q1. But as they start to move out to Q2, and they look at it and they go, we'll only budget 80%. We're going to keep 20% of the budget for that quarter in reserve. For what? For stuff that's going to happen. Stuff that I'm not going to be able to predict on the first day. It's my buffer of money to maneuver. It's why you don't plan to the last moment of any sprint, right? You need a little bit of ability to maneuver when something changes or goes wrong. In Q3, they only budget 60% of the money, and in Q4, they only budget 40%. So they have less precision as they go out. Okay, look, there's certain things that in any company you'd say, we know we're going to have to do this in Q4. This isn't open for debate. It has to happen there. But there's a lot of other things that could happen there, and who's going to predict those 9 months ahead of time? Right? Isn't it possible we could learn something over the 9 months that precede October that could change our mind about where we want to spend money in October? So why should I do all the work up front with the sole purpose of figuring out where every pound is going to be spent just to get to the beginning of October and go, okay, most of that's wrong, and that's not how I want to spend the money, and now I have to unwind all that inventory that I put together on planning and redo it in the context here. That seems extremely wasteful. Please. Correct. That was allocated for the quarter. So imagine, I mean, I'm not sure it's always going to be this way. You divided your year up into 4 quarters and 1/4 of the money to each one. Again, it doesn't have to be that way. But whatever that 1/4 of the money was for quarter one, fully allocated, I'm saying this is how we're going to spend it. Why? Because near term, and we're going to move down that path. But as we start moving on, it's like, I don't want to tell you how I'm going to spend 100% of the money, because I know things are going to change. So why do all the effort to try and figure that out just to be wrong and have to redo all the work? That seems like needlessly wasteful. Please. To value streams, to products, to value streams. There are teams on the value stream. We've assigned inside of each of those boxes. Wow, that was weird. How did I get that far back? I have a certain number of teams in here. These teams let's assume stable value streams for the moment. So there's a collection of teams that are in that value stream. Here's the good news. I know exactly what it costs me to do each sprint in that value stream. I know which teams are there. I know who's on each team. I need 5 minutes with HR or finance, and they're going to give me a number. Team 1 cost you 20,000 pounds. Team 2 cost you 22,000 pounds. Add it all up, I know exactly what it costs me on a sprint-to-sprint basis to run that value stream. So the moment I know what my budget is to that value stream, I can do all the math. In fact, I can go back if I want to and even calculate it. Let's see, it's a quarter. We're doing 2-week-long sprints. Okay, let's call it 6 sprints. I know what my cost per sprint is in the value stream. I know my budget. But what we're saying is we've allocated, we know what that value stream is going to work on for the first quarter. We've identified the work that's going to them, and we feel comfortable with that we're willing to allocate 100% of the funds versus saying, in Q2, here's your bucket of money, but only 80% of that is to identifiable work that's going to come in over here. We're saving 20% in that bucket because I don't really know what's going to show up over there. Could be some things I don't even know about yet, and less as we went further out. Horizon adjusted precision. Leaving, oops, sorry, I went too fast. I don't know, I apologize, jumping all over the place. Okay, we were here. We did this. I'll do it slower. Please. Okay. Yes, that's what the second point was all about. Shouldn't senior management, shouldn't the level at which senior management should be involved here is to say, you know what? I think I'm doing some work with a company right now where this happened, right? They moved all the money out of the UK back to the US value stream. Why? Because there was a decision made that something had to happen in the US, so they simply reallocated the funds. But that was a strategic decision at the executive management level, which ought to be their purview. What I don't want them to say is, no, look, we already allocated money to that value stream. It's in the budget. We can't do it. Seriously? You want to run your business when something emergent happens in the middle of the year, it's like, oops, we have to move the money around. So I think senior management should be able to come in and go, I'm taking your money and I'm moving it over here. Now, what you're going to do with those people has to be decided, right? I mean, they could still have work, or maybe you just take some of their money, or maybe you reallocate some of the teams into a different value stream, or just move them over as a set of teams to work as another value stream. If you were doing the SAFE model, that could be another release train included within a value stream, things like that. But I would expect senior management should have absolute ability to maneuver at that level. What I don't want them doing is coming up to that team and go, I need a variance analysis for why you're off. Like, seriously? That's the level at which you want to sort of manage control of budgets is down here? Wouldn't you rather manage it here? Let the teams manage it down here. Don't sweat the details down there, right? If we're wrong, we're not going to be wrong in a big way, right? We'll be wrong in a small way. Let it go. See if I can advance past here. There we go. All right, so stay with me. This is going to get a little complex, I guess, maybe sophisticated. All right, so there's our strategic planning. I'm showing you, by the way, at the portfolio level, I often run a Kanban system to make this work. So with the companies I've been doing work with, I run a Kanban system. I'll expand this picture out on the next slide. We do strategic planning. Why? Because that defines strategic initiatives. That informs the strategic filter. Initially, I have a lot of ideas. On a Kanban board, that could be a pool of ideas. These are all the really cool ideas I have. And you'll notice I'm willing to have an infinite whip limit on that. Oh, if we can have an infinite supply of cool ideas, doesn't mean we're going to go do them. All right. If I clear the strategic filter, all right, these are the ones I'm considering for strategic filtering. If it doesn't clear, it goes down here into no-go. If it clears, it's what I call ready for inception, meaning ready to do product level planning. It's an idea. Someone said, hey, this is pretty good. Let's take that to the next level of detail. So I have some number of cards that represent larger items, product level items that I want to consider taking down to a product planning level. So some of those I'll move over into product planning. Again, I'm establishing range whip limits here, somewhere between 12 and 24 cards. I know that's a little weird on a Kanban system, but you can do it if you wanted to have a range, somewhere between those two. Now, once I clear initial project, because remember, you could say we have the budget to be considering 12 projects at one time for candidates to move into the portfolio. The whole goal here is to get it into the portfolio backlog, which is that thing right there. This is the work that precedes that, trying to get it into the portfolio backlog. Once I get into ready to schedule, meaning it comes out of product planning, it's now a candidate for the portfolio backlog. Next thing I do is I run it through the economic filter. Hey, does this make sense? Economically, is the cost benefit in whack? Should I do it? If so, it goes through portfolio planning and it makes its way into the portfolio level backlog, a prioritized list of the products or projects that we as a company want to do. Now, senior management manages this. This is their portfolio. You could have multiple portfolios in a large company, maybe one for each major business unit, but there's a portfolio of all the work that we're considering doing. What I'm not trying to do at annual strategic planning is fully populate that portfolio backlog with all the products or projects I think I'm going to work on over the next year. That would be a horrible approach to portfolio planning. It'll violate most of the rules I'm about to talk about. And of course, once it's in the portfolio backlog, I can then choose to pull it and start working on it. Okay, I want you to begin working on this project now. So you have the green light to start. So I can manage all this at the executive level with a Kanban system that initiated with strategic planning and worked its way down. And a blow up of this just is that. And as I said, I'm doing this now in several companies. And to manage the flow of the work into the portfolio backlog. And then, of course, there's a whole process for how do I pull it out and start working on it. Please. Of course. Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. So the comment is this, since it's a Kanban system, or is it a pull-based model? And the answer is absolutely. Absolutely. You're pulling based on available capacity. The problem is, when I asked how many people here work at a company that are working on too many projects at the same time, most of your hands went up. Why? Because you're using a push system. You're not using a pull system. Someone in senior management goes, you got to start working on this next one. We don't have any capacity to do it. I know, but this is an important project. I need you to start working on it now. And they just keep pushing more and more work into the system. And we're saying, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We have a certain finite capacity to do work. By the way, the hint, the unit of capacity in Agile is the team, the high-performance Agile team. So you're not going to calculate your WIP limit based on the number of people you have. You're going to calculate it based on the number of high-performance Agile teams you have, because that's the unit of capacity in Agile. And we would pull that way. I'll give you an indication of that, right? But you'd have a pull model. You're pulling everything across the board, just like you would in any Kanban system. It's definitely a pull model, not a push. Comments on that? All right, let me take it a little bit further. Hello, why did you stop? There it is. There it is. Okay. So I'm going to quickly go through this. This is a very detailed description that I don't have time to do on portfolio planning. I do like a 90-minute conference presentation. If you want to go to my website, when you go to download this one, you can find the presentation just on portfolio management. Or if you're so inclined, it's chapter 16 of my book called Portfolio Level Planning. But I'll give you sort of like the highlights of it, because I want to get into cost accounting with the time we have left. All right, so basically, to me, portfolio level planning is how do you schedule the items in that portfolio? How do you manage the flow of the work in? How do you manage when to pull work out? And how do you deal with work that's already in process? All right. I'm listing 11 strategies there for how to do agile portfolio management. I have to admit, if I could change one thing at the executive level in pretty much every company I visit, this would be the first thing I would change. By far. I go right after this first. This is the big issue, because this is done so poorly in most companies and so poorly aligned with downstream Agile development that every one of you is already compromised on your teams before you even start on day one. So if I could fix this first, that's what I'd go after. 3 strategies for how you put things into the list and order it, rather. 4 for actually how you put them in and when 3 for when you take them out, and 1 for how do you deal with work that's already in flight. Because just because you started working on something doesn't mean you should finish it. All right? So I'm going to just give you a couple examples. I'm offering up, this one said life cycle profits. You need a normalized unit of measure in order to be able to compare things. So here's the issue. You ever have this problem in your company? Someone comes up and says, work on my project first. People are like, why? Oh, it generates £500,000 of revenue in Q2. Someone else walks in. No, work on mine first. Oh, okay, why? Mine will increase customer satisfaction by 5%. Which one's the better project? Which one should we do first? They're like in non-comparable units of measure, right? They're both in proxy variables. What I'm suggesting is you have to convert all proxy variables into life cycle profit space. Proxy variables are things like waste, cycle time, customer satisfaction, variability, innovation, quality. You have to convert all those into life cycle profits. Once I can put them in the same units of measure, I can very quickly weigh one option against another. So you got to transform all proxy variables to get the politics out of the discussion. Because otherwise, the way you're going to prioritize your backlog, noisiest person first. Whoever screams in your face the loudest, you'll just do theirs to shut them up. That's a bad strategy, right? Do that with your children, see how well it works. The louder your children screaming in your face, immediately do what they say. Wonder what behavior that promotes. Right? The goal is you order the backlog so you get the best overall aggregate life cycle profit. Cost of delay is critical in doing all this. The problem is most companies don't even calculate. Cost of delay is the cost of time. Here, I challenge you with a question. Don't answer it out loud, but certainly think about it. Get in your head whatever product or project you're working on. Now get in your head the date that it's supposed to deploy or ship. All right, you have those in your head now. Whatever that date is, I'm going to delay you by 1 month. Doesn't matter why, but I'm delaying you by 1 month going into production. What is the cost of that delay in life cycle profits? If you're sitting there going, I have no clue, then you're in trouble. Because you don't know what the cost of time is on your projects. And we always make trade-offs that at some level involve time. How could you make a trade-off involving time if you don't know what the cost of time is? That's why utilization-based planning is a disaster. It optimizes keeping people busy. It sub-optimizes keeping the work flowing. When the work isn't flowing, you incur delay costs. So you might say, wow, I don't ship the product. Every month we don't ship the product. It's 1 million pounds. Okay. A little bit of underutilization costs you 10,000 quid. We're trading off the wrong units. I estimate in t-shirt sizes at the portfolio level. You don't have to be overly precise here. Extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. You put a cost range on them. Now I can communicate to people, that effort, order of magnitude, medium. Think of how much easier it is for you to put medium on something than if I said, no, tell me exactly how many pounds to budget. Okay, 72,385 pounds. How much work would you have to do up front when you had the worst possible knowledge to come up with that number versus medium? You see my point? Medium's just as good, by the way, at this level. You can make a go, no-go decision. I would do it if it's a small or medium. I don't want to do it if it's bigger than a medium. But yet we're going to go tell people to come up with a pound number that's that precise. It's ridiculous. As I said, you have to manage the flow going in with to manage the flow going out. Most of our organizations violate this instantly in the third quarter of their fiscal year. If strategic planning, they define every project up to 15 months out, and they simultaneously dump them all into the portfolio. Can hardly imagine a worse way of doing it. I already said if you don't move on opportunities fast, they could decay exponentially. Emergent opportunity presents itself. Don't worry. We didn't think about it at this year's strategic planning. We'll pick it up at next September's strategic planning. Most of these opportunities decay very quickly. If you don't move quickly, you lose all the value quickly. You have to move fast. This deals with the idea that if you try to work on really big things, like a large farm vehicle hogging the road, it blocks the resources behind you, blocks all the projects behind you, and it causes a huge cost of delay. So when that farmer blocks a small 2-lane country road and the cars can't get around it, all the cars behind it are suffering a cost of delay. When you sum up the total cost of delay of all those cars being blocked, you realize the farmer's actually causing economic damage. put a large item in your portfolio, large items hog the road. They consume large resources for long periods of time. They cause a convoy effect in your portfolio, which means all the small items below it that could have gone through very quickly can't, and they're all now experiencing a cost of delay. When you sum up the total cost of delay of all the small things blocked by the big thing, you'll reach one conclusion. Don't ever do that. I hereby declare you are never allowed to put a large item in your portfolio. You have to break it into smaller and more frequent releases, or at least smaller and more frequent milestones. You ever gone into a restaurant where you can see the available tables and they won't seat your party? You ever wonder why? Because a good restaurateur knows that if 30% of their servers didn't show up, what happens if they seat my party at that table? Bad service? Actually, the problem's much worse. What if they're actually foolish enough to seat my party at that table and attempt to give us service? What happens to the service of all other tables in that restaurant? Oh, you know, it's happened to you, right? You went into the restaurant where the proprietor got greedy, sat too many tables based on a constraint in the restaurant, not enough servers, not enough kitchen capacity. The end result? Everybody gets bad service. This is the analogy I give to senior management when I tell them stop putting so much whip into the system. It's like seating too many tables at the restaurant. Why did you start working on 40 projects? We only have the capacity to do 10. Well, no one ever wants to tell a stakeholder no, that we're not working on their things. So what do? Work on all of them. The result, we make really, really small progress on all of them. When we could have stayed focused on a fewer number, made huge progress, got them done faster. Stop seating so many tables at the restaurant at the same time when you don't have the capacity to serve them. Okay. I'm going to jump by this just for time reasons because I want to handle the last piece here. Cost accounting. One is becoming more and more common in companies they go into. Obviously, companies do cost accounting, but here's the problem. See if your company has this issue. You have the finance team saying, quite honestly, we don't really understand this agile stuff. So you know what? Let's expense everything versus capitalize it. I'm trying to see whose face is freaked out by that, because I know that you're the people that have to deal with the accounting folks. That would be a disaster, right, from a financial point of view. Why? If you classify everything as an expense, you will very likely overpay on your taxes and understate your company's value. I can hardly imagine a worse combination of things, right? The problem is most accounting standards around the world assume a waterfall style development. So the people in finance, they're familiar with the waterfall style of development. They don't really know agile. And all the capitalization rules are defined against waterfall milestones. This is problematic for us in an agile world. So let's see if we can avoid this major impediment. All right. There's our friend waterfall. Here are the typical triggers between when you can capitalize and when you have to expense. You can start capitalizing on a project when you've achieved technical feasibility. These are according to GAAP standards. When you have written managerial approval to proceed. It's basically a written document that says you're good to go, continue. You have the committed development resources. The team is available, and management has a certain level of confidence that you'll actually be successful. At that point, capitalization could start. Now, if you map that onto a waterfall model, it tends to look like this. Don't get wed to the sizes of the bars. It's just illustrative. During analysis and design, you really haven't triggered those milestones yet, so most of the effort here is being expensed. But once you've cleared that, you typically hit those triggers, and you can start capitalizing the costs during coding and testing, but GAAP rules require all maintenance work has to be expensed, not capitalized. Those are the rules. So you tend to have something that looks like that. Now, again, all accountants around the world intimate with this. If they work in a software company, they know this. How can we do this in an agile-like world when we don't do waterfall? The picture at the top is the image I use for the Scrum framework. So there's the Scrum framework. Now, I'm showing some work that's taking place prior. Sprint 1 in this picture is weeks 4 and 5. But there's some work that had to occur before Sprint 1. If it didn't, how would you have been ready to do the work in Sprint 1? So what I'm showing is some of that portfolio level planning, product level planning, and release planning. Here's an example of how we might do this. and still be in compliance with our finance folks. I would suggest that weeks 1, 2, and 3 in that picture, you're probably going to expense, because we haven't hit the triggers yet that they're going to be looking for when could I start to expense. Week 3 is kind of iffy. Maybe you expense it, maybe you capitalize it. This is where you're doing like a user story writing workshop and you're doing size estimates. Some people would claim, no, that's part of the capitalized cost. Others would say it's expense. You know what? It's not a big deal anyway. It's just going to be 1 week or less. So I don't know that I would sweat that. But clearly beyond that, I'm in the period of time where I can start to capitalize. Not quite that easy. I have to look at what's in the product backlog. Product backlog can hold a variety of types of items. Some of them are features. Well, features can be capitalized. But what if you're repairing defects? That's maintenance work. Maintenance work has to be expensed. And to a certain extent, so does some amount of knowledge acquisition work, because you could claim maybe you haven't hit technical feasibility yet as a milestone. So what you would do is you would look at the items that you brought into the sprint, and on an item-by-item basis, you would make the determination, capitalize or expense. Okay, so look, now we're helping our finance folks understand how they can apply what they know in an agile-like world and not knee-jerk jump to the idea that we're going to have to expense everything, which I promise you no large corporation is going to do, because that's just dumb and it's too expensive. And if they do it, Agile takes a hit, because I've seen one organization where they do this and Agile projects get half the resources of waterfall projects because Agile projects are deemed more expensive from an accounting point of view. All right, oops, I jumped too far. All right, now, part of what I was suggesting earlier was that the unit of capacity in Agile is the team, not this. Telling me how many developers you have, how many QA people, UX people, I don't know how to take that and answer a question like, well, then how many projects out of the portfolio should we start at one time? The unit of capacity is the team. Now, you might give me a multi-dimensional WIP limit. Look, we have the ability to work on 2 type 1 projects, 2 type 2, oh, actually 3 type 1 projects and 2 type 2 projects. Not all teams are fungible. Not all teams are interchangeable. Some teams have to work on particular types of projects, so your WIP limit could easily be multidimensional. But starting here, I can get a gauge on how many projects or products can we realistically do at one time before we're going to start to exceed any reasonable WIP limit that we have. Now the killer. How many people here have to track task hours for cost accounting reasons? Okay, maybe a quarter of the people. If you're doing this now, you know the problems. Right? I mean, just think about it. You hate it, come on, right? This is like going back to your time card every week and filling out where you spent every hour of the week, right? And making that happen. I don't know about you, the one time I had to do this, like over 30 years ago, at the end of the week, someone would come slap me with a ruler and go, fill out your time card. And I would back and I'd figure out where to allocate 40 hours. Maybe it was right, maybe it wasn't. What do you do with hours above 40? I was actually on a time at a project where you were only allowed to allocate 40 hours. What if I worked 50 that week? What about the other 10 hours? That never really gets represented anywhere, right? So now we don't even have an accurate reflection of the effort expended on doing this. I'll argue it just gives you the illusion that you understand what you're doing, and you didn't really get any value. Why does this happen? Well, if you think about it, oh, yeah, certainly, it definitely ignores the fact that the unit of capacity is the team and not the individual. So why am I tracking hours at an individual level when the unit that I'm concerned about is the team? I'm going to show you how to do it a different way that won't require you to go to hours. This is not fantasy. I am doing this with companies today. So this isn't a hypothetical model. Here's your product backlog. Let's say we put story points on it. Got to have some kind of measure on it. All right. Now you'll notice I have in here, features right now. First, I'm going to argue that this is a much more meaningful level to address it than hours. First of all, it's at a unit that makes sense to the business. Those are features that we're trying to build. Right? Not all teams are using it, but a lot of teams are doing some kind of estimate on their product backlog items. So it's already in place. That's good news. And I'm going to argue it's simple, it's reliable, and perhaps most important on this slide, it's easily verifiable. Because if you're in the accounting group, your biggest fear in life is what? You're going to get audited. That's clearly your biggest fear in life. You wake up every morning under the fear that you're going to get audited, so you need something that is easily verifiable, because when the auditor comes in and goes, prove it, you need to be able to show them. All right. Here's how you could do it. Scrum teams have a fixed cost. You know who's on the team. You know the duration of the sprint. As I said, 5 minutes with HR, you got the cost. Let's say it's 20,000 pounds per sprint. Here's your product backlog. It's got a collection of items in it. Let's say we bring, 40 points of work into the sprint. 30 of those points are new features. 5 of those points are defects. And let's say 5 of those are knowledge acquisition work. How do we do cost accounting? Simple. We can capitalize 30 out of the 40 points. Yeah, so we got that. 15K can be capitalized. The other 5K has to be expensed. I can demonstrate it. Our tools probably have all the information in it. We know which items we worked on that sprint, which ones we finished. We can note in them whether or not they are a feature or a defect. They have their point values. We know the cost of the sprint. The math is simple. It's easy. I can verify it for every sprint, and all the data is already stored in the tools. And I never had to go to the hour level to do this, to make that happen. Please. So the comment was, the point values might just be estimates. What if they were, the term I think was horrifically wrong, right? They could be, right? And you have to ask yourself, are you willing to make the adjustment on a horrific mistake? A lot of teams would say they would make the adjustment. If you made a mistake of that magnitude, not making the adjustment feels like a dangerous thing to do. Please. That's right. So what happens in normal velocity accounting, you would only add the points in for a completed story. Stories are in a binary state, done or not done. If it's done, you would add in the velocity. If it's not, you wouldn't. So if you didn't finish all 30 points on the new features, then you couldn't take accounting credit for it. Now, I bet some of your accountants would try to challenge that and push on it. Well, it was effort towards the goal. We haven't yet met the goal, but we will eventually meet the goal. Unless, of course, you don't. Right? What happens if you never come back and finish story C in the next sprint because something of higher priority prevents you from doing it, or C no longer adds any value, so you don't want to finish it? So I'd have this conversation with the finance people and say, all right, let's come up with a policy on how do you want to handle those cases so that you're going to be comfortable when we get audited, you'll be able to justify. Yeah, you would argue that. You could argue that's how it's set up, but what if they said, no, we're not going to take credit for the other amount at all? I can't imagine that at some point they want to account for the pounds they just spent. So there's a number of issues like this in the model where you'll have to, and the companies I'm doing this with, we sit down with the accounting folks, we walk them through it, and they just start peppering us with questions. What about this? What about that? Or we ask them, what happens if this would occur? How would you want us to account for it? And they'll go off. They may even call their auditors and say, how should we do it? And then they'll deal with it that way. Please. Because it's considered maintenance work. And maintenance under GAAP accounting standards can only be expensed. It can't be capitalized. Now, the issue for you is this. When do you call something a defect? At what point in time, right? What if you haven't released the product yet? Would you really enter it into your product backlog as a defect? Probably not. If it's escaped out into the released product and you're now going to fix it, I think most reasonable people would say that's defect and that's maintenance work and therefore must be expensed. Please. Throughput accounting, what would that look like? Perfectly fine with that. If it works with the company and we're not in an area where we're going to be audited, or our financial statements are under scrutiny by third parties? Mm-hmm. You do. I fully agree with that. And when I was running my comparative agility project, I was not doing any of this kind of accounting. I was spending my money. I knew how I was spending it, right? And my tax returns were not going to capitalize versus expense this stuff. It just wasn't worth the effort to do that on that. But if I thought throughput accounting was an effective way of doing it in an internally facing organization, why would I not at least consider it? I probably would. Let's tie it off, right? So, actually, we're at 8 o'clock, and I don't want to hold people late. So I'll tell you this. What I'm about to present next came from a blog post that I did on this topic, and a company that I'd been working with came in and they put a series of challenge questions on the blog, and what I was going to show you was how I answered them, but you can read the blog if you'd like. But it was things like, how do you account for, people who work across Scrum teams, right? Sometimes one person, look, I may not like that, but it happens. Sometimes when someone's on multiple Scrum teams, and I'm saying that you don't worry about how many hours, you just do it at, well, they spend 40% of their time on team 1 and 60% of their time on team 2, so we'll just allocate their cost proportionately to the teams. And all the rest of the questions kind of look like that, like how do you keep up if team composition is changing? Well, in Agile, we try to have stable teams, but if you're going to change teams, you would only do it at the boundaries of sprints, and at that point, you would recalculate the cost for doing that sprint. So again, there's really no problem there. This one was a bit more complex. The challenge question was, what happens if when an auditor comes in and goes, tell me exactly what that person was doing on September 12th? And my first comment is, really? They're going to ask you a question like that? Is that really what they want to know? I mean, I would say, honestly, I would say that that person was a member of the Scrum team and they did whatever was necessary to help meet the goals of the sprint. That's right. Because now once you ask me about the team itself, I can tell you what they accomplished. So feel free to read the blog. But again, I don't want to keep people late, so I'll jump past that. Oh, I point this out. I put a lot of the images you saw up there are available for download off my website. There's a no-cost license. If you want to download and put them in your own presentation, you're snapping all these pictures. If you want a higher res version of that, feel free. And again, I'm going to post this all on the presentation on the website, so you have the link right there if you want it. So let me say this. Let me say thank you. Oh, I'll put this up. There's the URL, right? The website URL. And contact information if anyone wants to contact me. I'll say thank you, and I'm happy to stick around afterwards if people want to come up and ask questions, but it would be rude to go much longer. So thank you for having me tonight.